Hey there, and welcome to the Sarah Renee Show. I'm your host, Sarah Renee, and on today's episode, we are talking all about spiritual gifts and, more importantly, how you can develop your spiritual gifts to experience more of the supernatural and mystical encounters that God has for you in your daily life. I love talking about this stuff, obviously. It's a huge part of this show. And the reason that I like to dive into these conversations is mostly because this is so much of my life, right? I see the spirit world every single day. I experience something supernatural with God, whether it's for me personally or with a client or just out and about in my community or with my family. I mean, more days than not, I would say most every single day. And so it's a big part of my life. And I see so many misconceptions around Jesus in particular, but even around when we talk about living a faith-based life or a God-centered life. And a lot of these, like I see in the recovery world, right? But I even see it out and about. Like I just saw comments on somebody else's post right before this talking about how to follow Jesus means like conformity and limitations. And, there were a whole lot of stories in this person's comment that I see floating around in society, but they all kind of boil down to this misconception that living a God-centered life, that following Jesus or being very like faith-based in your faith, whatever that may be, that it's boring, that it's all about the rules and, strict adherence to those rules, and that it's somehow limiting. And listen, I know that there are definitely religious paths that are like that for sure. I'm not saying that that doesn't exist. However, when we're talking about it from a spiritual lens, so a spiritual lens of developing your personal relationship with your higher power, the spiritual lens of like, to me, that means really living, like embodying your faith, truly living your faith. That misconception is like, it couldn't even be farther from the truth, because the reality is that when we develop this closeness with God, one, our spiritual gifts begin to organically come online, right? Even if we had them to a degree before, it's like God turns the dial up the closer that we become with Him, but also we're called to be of greater service. And we start to see through our connection with God how God works in the world. We start to notice and see. It's almost like I compare it to living in that higher dimension, right? Like living in that 4D space here in our modern day world, where we see, even if you're not a seer like I am, we see God in everything. We see God working in people, working in situations. And it's just this really profound shift of perspective that then unlocks the supernatural realm. And a lot of that comes through your faith, because, again, these are things that in our modern day society, a lot of people don't believe still happen, or there's fear around it. You even see fear from very faithful people, of where because the church has kind of got away from teaching about spiritual gifts, and so there's a lot of fear around spiritual gifts in general, when that is a huge part of our faith. It's a huge part of our walk with God. And so I want to talk to you today about that. And and break some things down for you to bring you deeper understanding around your spiritual gifts and around where they come from. It's God. Um, Spoiler alert, it's all from God. Um, and how you can begin to develop those more. And I want to just share, like, very practically what that looks like for you. Um, and how you can start on your own. I obviously, as I always say, I highly recommend working with a mentor because there's so much to learn, and discernment is such an important lesson. And you just want to be, you just how do I want to say this? You want to be responsible because there is, it's like with power comes great responsibility, right? Like there's a great responsibility around spiritual gifts. And so it's good to have a mentor, whether it's me or somebody else, a spiritual director or a minister or someone else that um, and trust to help you develop your spiritual gifts in a God-aligned way, in a safe way, and in an ethical way. Okay, so here's the thing. We all have gifts within us. For some people, it's harder. It's a more challenging path because they are so left brain oriented, right? So highly logical that it's hard for them to wrap their head around it, right? It's hard for them to turn off their mind, right? To get into their imagination to access this, because that is how God uses our imagination to communicate with us along with our other senses. Okay, so it's not all imaginative, but especially if you're a seer, or you get vivid like feelings, things like that, so much of how God communicates the spiritual realm to us is through metaphors, through stories, and so our imagination is a big part of that. And so you want to have like well, let me back up. Blah. Um, you, that's where people who are so into the intellect of it, right? They might know the Bible front to back. They might know um, the whole history of their faith. They might know step by step how these spiritual gifts work, and yet they struggle to actually experience them firsthand. It's because they are generally too in their head, right? We need to get into our hearts for this because this is, the source of your spiritual gifts is all through your heart, right? Through your heart. I don't mean literally, okay? So this is not like you feel it in your heart. I mean, God might communicate to you through your heartbeat, sure, but I'm talking about through the emotional heart, through your heart center, your heart posture, your true connection with Christ or with your higher power. That is where the spiritual gifts come from. And that is why, because, and before I get into all the details, I just want to give a little note on this. Um, I am very cautious around any kind of class, any kind of certification course that says, well, especially because in the prophetic world, we don't use the language medium, and I'm going to get into that too. But like, take this course and you'll be a medium. Take this course and you'll be a healer. Take this course and you'll be XYZ. You can learn modalities. You can learn, right? Modalities meaning you can learn step-by-step instructions on how to do something. It doesn't mean that you have that gift. God is the only one who can activate and grow someone's gifts. God is the one who is in charge of how you use your gifts. Now, what happens, because I feel like there are probably a lot of mediums and psychics out there who are just like how I was, who are accurate. They are accurately accessing the spirit world. I would say a lot of them probably have some hit and miss if they're not God-based at all. They might have hit and miss experiences. They might be feeling like seeing clients not come back because the client doesn't feel good after the session, right? Different things like that. So they might be struggling in those ways, but they might actually have some accuracy because they might actually be accessing the spirit world through whatever their tool is, through whatever that modality is. But here's the thing, that's not how God intended it. That's like essentially trying to go around God, trying to say, well, I don't want to do it your way because I think my way just feels fancier. My way feels more magical. My way feels better. My way feels more certain, right? And that's usually what it comes down to. It usually comes down to us in our human nature. We want to find a path where we have some kind of control. We want that paper that someone else signed that tells us you have this gift and can do this type of session. And again, maybe that person, they might have taught you the step-by-step modality just fine, okay? But it's not through God. And so that is why I really urge people away from those things to work with someone, because we do exist. This is how I've always mentored people. This is how I know there are other people out there. I don't know any well enough to recommend them, but I know I've seen bits and pieces, around the online world. Um, but there are people who, like me, who know that God is the giver of the gifts, that God knows your gifts and God knows the people that he has assigned to you. See, there's so much that goes into this. When we take control and we're like, I'm going to go learn this modality to do these types of sessions, right? Even when we call it readings, right? Even that language, it's like, I'm reading you. I'm reading this situation, right? We're removing God from the picture because it makes our ego feel better. Let's just call it what it is, right? Like it makes the ego feel better. But it leaves out the most important part of the whole thing. And that is that God knows what each of us is dealing with. God knows exactly what we need. God knows what we need better than we know what we need. And God can just take your gifts to another level. And so, again, that's why I like to share this because I know a lot of people were like, when I came out and I said like I had this experience with Jesus and I'm making these changes and I'm following him, and so I'm letting some of this stuff go. I know a lot of people were very upset about that, and I received some you know, um, upset and all the way to outright hateful messages from people who, were like, again, like you're shutting yourself down, or you're like, who had all kinds of stories around it. And the reality is that I feel I experience my gifts now, these gifts from God, in a cleaner way, in a lighter way, in a purer way. Um, they don't feel draining, but like this supernatural magic is better. It's turned up more. I see more clearly, actually. I have more vivid visions. And what's really been cool for me personally is that my experiences on my own have grown exponentially through Christ. Whereas before, I could always, I mean, it's always easier to receive a word of guidance for somebody that you don't know, because it's just easier to be more pure of heart about it because you don't have a whole lot of bias, right? So that's just a logistical thing with just how we are as humans. But like before, I could be so good for clients, and then on my own I was dealing with confusion and ups and downs and feeling drained, and like it definitely didn't feel super magical, for a long time, or super uplifting in that way. And in my walk with Jesus, I'm experiencing more supernatural experiences, more mystical experiences, more visions, like real visions of Christ that are overwhelming in the best way. Like overwhelming in the sense of awe and wonder, visions of Mary, visions of angels, visions of heaven that are more detailed, that are more emotionally um, tangible. Um, Jesus has given me the gift of even showing me one of my own loved ones, well, two of my own loved ones actually, in heaven, which was life changing for me. I never saw my own people before, and that was a gift that Jesus gave me, and it was, I'm beyond grateful. And so I would say just it gets better. And it's like when you make the decision, because I do feel like a lot of people in that world are like me in that you have real gifts and that you're called to a prophetic path of really being aligned with God and letting go of those false access points that can also include deception and include confusion, and that are outside of God's will, right? And so I never want to scare anybody or judge anybody, but that's a real part of it. And that's the real distinction. And when you close those doors, when you make the decision to follow God's path and to say, I'm not going to attempt to access this with these other tools that I don't need, because now God is my access. God is my connection, right? Like that's when your gifts like truly open up to a whole other level. And so I would encourage anyone with spiritual gifts who maybe you're already using them to make that shift, because it's just been so remarkable for me. And that's the distinction here. So when we're talking about spiritual gifts and kind of the new agey, just spirituality world versus prophetic gifts in the more Christian context or faith-based context, even though I would still say spiritual context, but just to distinguish those two paths for you, I'm going to use those religious terms. Um, but you certainly don't need to be super religious for prophetic gifts. If we're talking about, that's a whole other topic, actually. I'm like, I don't want to go down the rabbit hole. You don't need to be religious in the spirit of religion that is judgmental. It's what we all think of when we think of like a strict religious person, right? I don't mean religious as in devout, as in faithful. Okay, so again, don't want to go down that rabbit hole today, but just explaining why I'm using these two different languages to clarify this. So in the spirituality, kind of just open, more new age world, a lot of times people, like when I'm talking to people from that world and I share my gifts or how I help people, they'll be like, okay, how do you access? What do you use to access? the spirit world. And usually they'll be like, do you use plant medicine, tarot cards, pendulums? What else have people asked? I don't even know. I can't even think of them right now, but there's other things as well. Reiki, I think, is one. Um, and I'm always like, no, like I've never ever used those as an access point. God has always been like prayer, and God has always been my access point. I've never even done plant medicine, no desire to. Big no for me personally. Um, but that's the difference. So prophetic gifts, and I want to get into this. So prophetic does not just mean future. A lot of times we that gets mixed up as like all prophetic gifts mean the gift of prophecy in regards to predicting, and that's not what that means. So prophetic gifts are these spiritual gifts from God, and God is your access point. Prayer is the tool. Okay, so prayer, God, faith, that's your modality. Okay, so I want to explain this in as clear of terms as I can now. So you have your modality. If you're going to do this, you want to, well, God will guide you in this, but like it's when I've worked with clients, it's very clear of like we want to close all of the other doors. You want to make sure, we renounce those, we close those, like just because that's going to purify your journey. We want to make sure that there's no contamination, right? Energetically, spiritually, meaning. Okay, so you come back. So now your modality is very clean, right? So notice that first. You don't have like 10 modalities. You don't have a whole room of all of these tools. And so the ego is going to go, it's less magical, right? The ego is going to be like, oh my gosh, this is less magical. Really, it's the ego fighting for the power. Because to experience prophetic gifts is the ultimate surrender. It is the ultimate God reliance. God could choose not to send a message through. God could choose not to answer your question. It's the ultimate act of trust. That is why it is such a sacred journey. God answers you most of the time. Don't want you to freak out, but I just wanted to point out, like that's the gifts come from your surrender, from your God reliance. So, I'm getting out of order on my notes here, but this is going to fit here more than later. That's why a lot of prophetic types have very challenging, even traumatic early years, childhoods or young adult years. It's not, the pain has nothing to do with your spiritual gifts. No amount of suffering or pain gives you gifts. Make that clear. You do not have to suffer to have gifts. Okay, God gives you the gifts, but where that correlation is that through that hardship, the prophetic type, instead of shutting down, maybe they shut down for a little bit, but they always hit a point where instead of continuing in that direction away from God, they come to an ultimate place of surrender and complete God reliance. And so the prophetic type learns that lesson early. I learned that lesson very young. I learned like God is in charge and I want God to be in charge. I don't want to be in charge. God knows better than me, very young. And so that's that connection, right? And so it's not the pain that causes your gifts, it's the surrender and your close relationship with God that reveals the gifts you've always had. And that is the absolute truth. right? So when we're talking about how do you develop these gifts, okay? So we have your modality. The modality is God. The modality is your relationship with God and prayer. Okay. And you want your prayer to be a genuine, heartfelt prayer, which that's what all prayer should be. Jesus tells us in the Bible, right? When he gives us the Our Father prayer, he tells us to pray from the heart, that it matters, to pray behind closed doors on your own from the heart. Okay, so you want your prayer to be from the heart. It's not just give me gifts so I can, launch this business or save this person or go do this or, start a ministry or whatnot. It's a prayer to be of service. It's a prayer, God, use me. Use me however you see fit, Lord. Use me. And then when you start to get into helping other people, it's God, use me to deliver a message to them. Use me, tell me what you would have them know. Help me, help me help them however you want that to be. It's constant surrender. So that's why we got to do that inner work to really purify our minds and our hearts. Right? So we get to that point. So then what you want to do is you want to look at what is your prophetic language. This is the language between you and God. Okay, so what do I mean by that? Okay, so your language is going to be, it might either sight, seeing. This is where God shows you images, visions, dreams. They might include symbols, right? God might show you a symbol. These visions can be literal, but they can also be symbolic. Okay. So meaning God shows me a rosary every time he wants to communicate to me that somebody is religious, even if they are Protestant or Jewish or Muslim or whatever it is, like that, it's my symbol with God is a rosary, right? So, 'cause that's what my mind understands. Right. And so this is where it's a strong imagination, but you're not making it up. Okay. It's God is using your imagination to show you these visions. So it's coming through the Holy Spirit. All right. So this is like you would say, God shows me. That's how, if you're a seer, your experience is going to be God shows me, right? So for me, God shows me the spirit world. God shows me angels. I just wrote an article on my Substack of God showing me angels around this woman at the grocery store. It's a very sweet story. And thank you so much to everybody who liked it and shared it and sent me messages. I'm so glad that it touched you as much as it touched me. But God shows, so that's an example. God shows me the spirit world. God also shows me, and I used to get this only when I would touch people physically, like when they would hug me or shake hands or something like that. And then it started happening without needing to touch people or even necessarily interact with them a whole lot, but where God will show me like a movie trailer next to the person's head. And with different pieces of their life. And what I realized is God was showing me that to show me their heart condition, to show me their heart posture. Not the physical condition, but where their heart is. Are they traumatized? Are they wounded? Are they in darkness? Are they harmful? Are they loving? Are they helpful? Are they trustworthy? Like those types of things, right? And to help guide me. Whether it's how to help them, how to interact with them, how to protect myself, whatever the situation calls for, right? So God shows me those things. Okay. Then the second type of language is hearing. Okay. So this is where usually it's more internal. It's like in your mind, you hear an internal voice that's God. or you hear a phrase, you hear a word, right? This divine downloads are more of knowing, which we're going to get to next, but sometimes the hearing feels like a download. If it's like a phrase, particularly, or maybe a song, like a song lyric, God can use songs. And right, that would be God tells me. God's telling me to tell you this. God's telling me to not go here today. God's telling me to call this person today. God's telling me, I had this happen. I was at a workout class and there was a guy and I knew him, a little bit. We would chat and stuff. We'd been going to the same class for a little over a year. But we weren't friends by any means. Like I didn't really know him that well. And I heard God say he needs to go home for the holidays. Tell him, it was like an order. And that was it. That was the whole message. I didn't get why. I didn't get any details. That's all I got. And I'm like, I don't know, God, like this guy barely knows me. I don't want to freak him out. Like, I don't even know. Maybe he's already going home for the holidays. God, tell him, like it was just very clear. Tell him. So I go up to him. I'm like, hey, this is very weird. Like I get it. Very random, but I was there at the end of class and I heard God tell me, you have to go home for the holidays this year. Like, does that mean anything to you? That's all I got. I don't know. And he tells me, oh my gosh, I just decided today to not go home for the holidays. And then God gives me the next piece of the message and this came in more like a feeling, and I had a vision. I had a vision of him sitting with his family around the table and a feeling that something was going to change next year, that it was very important that he be there this year. So I told him that. He was like, okay, thank you so much. He was very gracious about receiving this message. He ended up going home for the holidays. And it was a few months after that, like I want to say springtime, that his grandmother passed away. And she passed away very quickly, very suddenly, um, you know, rather unexpectedly. And so he would have missed the last holiday with his grandmother if he hadn't have gone home, if he had just postponed it another year, which he was doing for, work and money and all of the logical reasons that we all have to when we do things like that sometimes. And so that's an example of hearing, and that's an example of obedience when you don't even know the whole picture and how important it is, and just the type of assignments that God calls us to do. Okay, so then we move into knowing. Okay, so this is like where I feel like knowing is when we get this like divine download where we just know something, we know it, and we have no logical reason to know it. Right? So this is instant clarity. We don't process at all. So that's the gift of knowing, or the prophetic language of knowing. It's that we get this knowing, we have no reason to know it, and we didn't logically process anything to get there. So if you are logically processing what you see, what you hear, what you feel to get to a knowing, I would say knowing is not your language. It might be a little bit, but it's not the main one. So do you see? Because it's knowing without processing. Okay, so that's how you would determine that. And it's like the truth just drops in. You just know what to do. You just know what to say. You just know what happened. And so it's like you would say, I don't know. I just know. Right? Like, I just know. All right. Feeling. So my empathic people, this is for you. This, right? Feeling when it comes to other people, you're very empathic, right? That's the language. You feel what they feel, or you feel the spiritual atmosphere of a room, of a person, of a situation. You feel the emotional atmosphere. You feel spiritual activity going on. This is usually the language that most intercessors, spiritual intercessors, when we get to what the gifts are, have. So, you know, we'll get into that. But make a note of that if you are a feeler, right? So this is like you sense things. Like how you'll say it like, I just sense it. I just feel. I feel called to call this person. Right? Have you ever felt? So this would be the difference if we're talking about this simple example of like calling your best friend, right? So let's say God's trying to tell you to call your best friend. They need to talk to you for some reason. Or he wants you to show up for them for some reason. So if you're a seer, you might see a vision of them. You might see a vision of their phone number. You might see having a conversation with them, right? Something in connection with them to get you to call them. If you might hear God say, call them. You might hear their voice on a phone as more of, right? Like more of a symbolic way to tell you to call them, or hear something that reminds you of them. Okay. Knowing, you're going to just know, I need to call them. I don't know why, I just need to, right? Again, no processing, very quick. Feeling, you're going to feel like you need to call them. It's going to be a sense. It's going to be, I don't know, I feel like I need to call her. Right? So that's how those are. So those are your prophetic languages. So usually, people will have multiple, but you'll have one that's the most dominant. For me, seeing is my most dominant. And then I experience the other three kind of intermittent, however, they will fit into the vision that God is telling me. So God gives me the vision first and foremost, and then the like message within the message, makes sense, comes through those other things. Like I know something about that vision, or I feel something about that vision, or I hear something about the vision. But every now and then, like with that guy in that class, my initial insight, I just heard, right? And so this is where it requires that ultimate surrender. There's no way that we can control it, but what we can do is we're called to steward our gifts. And so you want to track what your prophetic language is, and then you want to start developing that language. You want it to start communicating with God in that way, meaning you pray, you're talking to God, God, guide me, guide my path today. And then you're noticing what you see and you're following it. You're noticing what you hear and you follow it. Like you're really noticing your dominant prophetic language and you're following at it. And God's going to start talking to you more and more. And it's like working out. You're going to build that muscle to be sharper and sharper. And God's going to turn up the dial as your capacity, right? As your sensation, your capacity for that language develops. Okay, so that's where you want to begin. All right. And this is the thing, like most people, they don't lack spiritual gifts, they lack the understanding of how their gifts work, or they lack the discernment of how God speaks to them. Because I have a client, she sees, and God shows her through cartoon images. And that's how she knows it's God and not herself making it up. So you can ask God that too. You can ask God, like, help me to know when a message is coming from you versus when it's my own mind, or when it's the voice of the enemy. I mean, that's relatively easy to develop, but the harder one is when it's from God versus from us. right? And so you can ask God to give you ways to discern that more easily, and he absolutely will. We're not in control, but we are allowed to ask for help. God wants us to hear him. He wants us to have these gifts. He wants us to share our gifts. He wants us to understand him, because then he can have us, help us more and have us do more things, and have us have these supernatural, amazing experiences. Like, God wants that for us. Right. And so then we move on to the actual gifts. So when you think about gifts, this is how God then works through you. So we have your prophetic language type, and then we have, okay, how is God working through you using that language to communicate to you? And so this is where we get into the gifts of knowledge, right? You're given facts, words, pieces of insight. Wisdom is the guidance of what to do with the knowledge, right? We talked about this a couple weeks ago, but I just want to run through them again. Healing, faith is like certainty in the supernatural, absolute certainty in what God is doing, in that God is here, God is present, right? Faith is a must for a lot of the other, gifts. Miracles. Faith is a must for the gift of miracles. Absolutely. That's divine intervention, unexplainable shifts in people. I would say a miracle gift that I've experienced has been of God activating people's gifts through me, or through what we're doing together, through the work, where there is a very clear activation when they're in the container or in the prayer, where they experience their spiritual gifts, and then we do the work to develop and steward them, right? But that's a miracle that I have personally experienced, that I would put on as a miracle, where I didn't even do anything. So I couldn't take credit for it if I wanted to, because it's very clearly all God. Um, and so, okay, so then we get into discernment of spirits. So that's sensing what is God and what's not, or the spiritual influences of a person, of a situation, like the underlying spiritual elements, spiritual tone, that sort of thing. Intercession. Okay. So this is where I want to make this note, where if you feel a lot of what the world is going through, what other people are going through, the atmosphere of a space, a lot of times feelers will have a gift of intercession, where I always see it. God shows it to me. It's so beautiful. It's like I see the most beautiful, magnificent altar that you could possibly imagine. And Jesus is standing there, and the intercessor is the person who brings the feelings from the people to Christ. Right? And so this is the intercessor brings that to God and prays on their behalf. Right? Creating this opening for divine will, divine intervention to come in. Also, this can be to help process the burden, process these emotions, process pain, process fear, process different things by bringing it to God. Because maybe somebody doesn't know what to do with it. They don't know how to give it to God. They don't know how to process it. They don't know how to let go. And so the person who feels that heaviness can then bring it to God on their behalf. Right? So that's the intercessor. It is very, very sacred. I feel like it's kind of an underrated gift, but it's very, very special. And then deliverance. Oh, and this is one of the keys too. So intercession is, right, like we're feeling what's going on with humanity and we're bringing it to God. Versus like the gift of prophetic wisdom, knowledge, prophecy as in future, right? Warnings, that sort of thing, is going from God to the people, a messenger for God to the people, right? And so that's the back and forth. Okay, deliverance is the ability to remove oppression, the ability to remove blocks, to help people, and it requires absolute faith and discernment. And so you must have those two gifts to combine with your authority in your higher power, the authority given to you through Jesus, through God, that allows you to facilitate that deliverance for the people that you are helping. Okay. So most people, most prophetic gifted people have multiple gifts. But again, you'll probably have one or two that are more dominant. But what happens is God uses your gifts to, like, you receive them for personal revelation, for personal growth, safety, well-being for your family. And then you're called to use them more occasionally or more, I don't want to say casually, because I don't want to imply that there's not a big responsibility there, but less often, more infrequently with other people. It's more of like you're available, you're open, you're like, God, use me as your conduit, use me as your instrument. And God calls you, but it's not your entire divine assignment. Whereas like the prophet, I would say the prophetic, because I don't like to mix up prophet with like the prophets in the Bible, right? But the prophet, more of the prophet is consistently entrusted to deliver messages to other people from God, right? And to carries a great responsibility, sometimes a greater weight, sometimes a greater burden of, I don't want to say it's not like it's negative. I don't want to make it out to be negative, but there's an absolute responsibility there, pretty big one when it's consistent like that. And so the prophet has to steward their gifts, has to steward their bodies, their minds, and their hearts in a more disciplined way to be able to be entrusted in that higher capacity. Make sense? So this, so that's kind of, so back up, recenter. Uh, so when you feel called, either as a prophet or, you know, to develop your prophetic gifting, I want you to think about what we've kind of talked about. We've kind of illustrated this already in order. So you first want to invite God. You want to say, God, I'm here. I'm available. I feel that you've been calling me to this. This is, you might not even be sure. Maybe you don't know if it's prophetic gifting and it's going to be more kind of interchangeable, like less consistent, or full-blown prophet. Maybe you don't know. Maybe you don't have a sense yet. That's okay. You just want to be available to God. That's what, so instead of thinking of it as, I need to activate these gifts or I need to develop these gifts, right? We're going to come back to our modality, our whole modality to begin with, to prayer to God. God, you know, I've been feeling or I've been experiencing some of these gifts. I've been feeling called to develop these gifts. I'm here. I'm here, God. Pick me. I say yes. Use me however you wish to use me, God. And, you know, I'm open. Activate the gifts that you want me to have. And you can certainly say, listen, when your talks with God, like, you want to be honest, you want to be pure of heart, you want to be authentic. So if you want all of the gifts, by all means, tell God, you know, hey, I would like all of them. It's your choice, your will, but I would like all of them. You can absolutely say that. And Same thing if you're a little intimidated by one, or if one doesn't feel aligned, share that with God. This is a collaboration, right? And so talk to God about it, and then make yourself available to be used. So what does this look like? This means sitting in silence, listening to God every day, even if it's a few minutes, right? But prioritizing your one-on-one time in prayer, and then quiet prayer, listening to God every single day. Because again, you want to learn, what's your prophetic language? How does God speak to you? We got to know that before we move into sharing our gifts. Okay, so that's number 2. So number 1 is make ourselves available to God. We say, God, I'm open, I'm here, use me however you want. I'm here to be your instrument, your conduit, and I'm open to all of these gifts, to whatever gifts you see fit. And then we spend time in God's presence. We start to talk to God and to notice and pay attention to and steward our prophetic languaging of how God speaks to us. Okay, and then 3, this is one of the most important. They're all important, but this is a big one. Obedience. My goodness, I know people don't like this word, but we want, how can God use you in this way and rely on you and trust you if you're only willing to listen every now and then, or when it feels comfortable, or when you want to, or when you're in the mood? If you just think about that, think about you relying on somebody. When you rely on somebody, you rely on the person who shows up no matter what, right? So that's what you want to think about. When God is calling you to do something, when God is calling you to, it'll usually begin with personal calls of call this person, go here, don't go here, get this book, spend more time in prayer, right? Follow this path, whatever it may be, right? But God will give you things to do or to not do. And you got to obey if you want to develop your gifts, because that is developing this trust between you and God. And then God's going to start calling you to show up for others, to serve, to deliver a message, right? So how this looks like for my intercessors, you're going to feel maybe a whole lot more. So God is calling you to bring that. He's trusting you to bring that to him. Okay, so you're going to start, your obedience will look like bringing everything you feel from the world, from other people, to God, and praying for them and asking God, is there anything I need to do? And trusting when you get however God speaks to you, to surrender it, or to pray for them, or what, God will direct you with what you need to do. If there is a message that comes in, if you have gifts of intercession with gifts of knowledge or wisdom, or what, however that works for you, God will communicate that to you. Okay, so you want to daily be obeying what God is calling you to do. And then you want to notice the fruits, right? Because this is in that discernment process. In your walk with God, so when you're receiving these messages from God, it's always going to feel clear. And God's always going to have you be doing things that are leading to fruits of the Spirit. They're leading to peace, leading to healing, leading to joy, right? Leading you closer to him. Anything that leads you further from God, further from truth, into anxiety, into fear, that is not God. So we want to say no to that. Only follow God's voice, right? And so that's a practice. And what this does is this sets you up in this constant communication with God, in this constant, stewarding and practicing and developing of your gifts. Then I would say work with a mentor, because you're gonna have questions, because things are going to be happening. Supernatural things are going to start happening, and you promise you're going to have questions. So find somebody that you trust that you can work with and learn from, and that will help mentor you and how your gifts are coming from God and is not going to bombard you with other modalities that are not from God. Okay. And just know that because you don't develop your gifts by chasing them, right? Again, that's back to control. You develop your gifts by growing so close to God that they naturally come alive. So that's this process. This process is a process to grow closer to God. Spending time with him, listening to him, following his lead, all of that is going to bring you closer to God. Right? Learn his voice, learn his ways, and you're going to come so close to him that you're going to be able to hear him. Your gifts are naturally going to come alive, and God's going to call you when it's your time to serve. He's going to call you to start helping people. You've got to learn, use that listening prayer, right? That quiet time with God to learn how to shut your mind off, right? Like to learn how to stop thinking and listening to God. You can even do imaginary prayer. Yeah, imaginary prayer. Why do I want to call it some imagination prayer? I don't know. It's like guided meditation, of imagining God with you, imagining Jesus with you, imagining a scene from the Bible. When we pray the rosary, right, we meditate on the mysteries, but it could be a guided meditation of, walking with Mother Mary and coming to Jesus and then listening to Jesus. You could imagine Jesus standing in front of you. You could put yourself before the cross and Jesus is on the cross. You could put yourself when Jesus is ascending, right, in like a scene from Jesus's life, or just imagine Jesus there with you. And that can kind of, create that, it can make it more visceral, more tangible, more real. And sometimes that can help you turn the logical mind off and get you into, that right brain, right hemisphere of your brain, where you can start to experience more of the supernatural, more creativity, more messages and insights directly from God. Okay, we're going to call it today. I know that was a lot. I feel like this episode is sort of like a mini workshop. So definitely recommend writing anything down that related to you, that resonated with you. Look into it more. I'm always here. I'm happy to answer your questions. If you want to reach out to me, you can leave a comment. If you're watching on YouTube, you can message me on Instagram at the Sarah Renee Show, or through my website, sarahrenee.com. All of those links are below. And make sure that you hit follow or subscribe and share this episode with somebody that you love that would benefit from today's message. What else? Website, all of that has calendars. You can book a single session with me. You can book, a package, or go into one of my mentorship programs to do further mentorship with me around your spiritual gifts. I would love to help you grow closer to God, to heal on a soul level, and to rise into your spiritual gifts with joy and confidence and peace of mind. So definitely let me know if I can help you out. Have a beautiful rest of your day. Oh, that was the other thing. If you're watching on YouTube, give this video a thumbs up. It really helps me out, guys. It helps out the algorithm. It makes a big difference. Giving a thumbs up, hitting subscribe, commenting, all of that really, really helps me out. So I greatly appreciate it. And thank you for helping me build this community here. And I look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Okay, bye.